Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'd like to start things off with a few announcements. First, we will be recording this session and sending it out to you later today. Second, please feel free to submit questions at any time during this session in either the chat or the Q&A feature. We will answer them in the order they were received. And with that, I'll pass things over to you, Jason.
Great, thanks so much, Petra. Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to our discussion on how to return to work, where we're going to take an integrated approach to this topic. We're going to look at it through the lens of cybersecurity, human resources, and legal. My name is Jason Skidmore. I am with Vernovis. I'll be moderating the conversation this morning. For those of you not familiar with us, Vernovis is a staffing and solutions provider focused in technology, cybersecurity, and accounting and finance. Through this model, we are able to both staff up existing teams with talent to complete critical projects, or for our clients, we can also deliver the outcomes they are pursuing through our team of experienced consultants. We pride ourselves on bringing top knowledge and expertise to our clients, and we hope that this webinar will serve all of you as an opportunity to learn from some of the top leaders in their respective fields. Our session this morning will follow the format of a panel discussion, with me asking our panelists questions around some key considerations of a return to work strategy. Obviously, as we all adjust to the idea of reopening the workplace on whatever timetable fits your organization, it's important to be asking certain questions around best practices in a new environment that we are all continually adjusting to. Our discussion this morning will revolve around three broad topics as we consider reopening the workplace: safety, policy, and change management. And now I'm going to give some quick introduction of our panel members and welcome them to the call. I'm going to start with Kevin Jackson. Kevin is the CISO at Vernovis. Kevin is an executive information technologist, enterprise architect, and chief information security officer with over 25 years of experience serving in both commercial and DoD environments. Kevin's areas of expertise include cybersecurity program management, IT systems architecture, and compliance management, as well as wireless telecommunications and IT infrastructure. During his time supporting the U.S. Air Force at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, Kevin served as chief architect and DoD compliance manager for individual IT program investments. Kevin is a part-time adjunct professor within the University of Cincinnati's IT department and the Villanova University College of Professional Studies, teaching online classes in cybersecurity and business intelligence. Greg Tapocsi is legal counsel with Dinsmore Shohl. Greg focuses his practice on healthcare law and leverages his background dealing with cybersecurity, data privacy, and healthcare issues to provide trusted counsel to clients on a variety of matters, including risk management, operational compliance concerns, provider credentialing, administrative proceedings, and compliance program implementation and training. Greg previously worked as a senior assistant attorney general and director of Cyber Ohio, which is a division of the Ohio Attorney General's office. With Cyber Ohio, Greg helped draft and pass into law the Ohio Data Protection Act. The legislation was the first of its kind in the United States and gives businesses an affirmative defense to certain data breach lawsuits. He has also worked as an enforcement and compliance attorney with the State Medical Board of Ohio, ensuring statutory and administrative rule compliance by physicians, physician's assistants, and massage therapists. Additionally, he oversaw investigations and prepared complex cases for formal action by the State Medical Board. Greg, thanks for joining us this morning. Welcome to the call. And then Keith Rummer, CHRO and COO of Phillips Edison Company. Keith joined Phillips Edison & Company in 2012. Prior to joining Phillips Edison, he served as Vice President, Associate Relations and Compliance with the global eyewear manufacturer and retailer Luxottica. He was previously employed as the Vice President and Director of Employee Relations and as in-house employment counsel for Fifth Third Bank from 2004 to 2008. He served as Corporate Counsel, Compliance Officer, and Assistant Secretary for the healthcare staffing firm AMN Healthcare from 2001 to 2004. He held law firm associate positions in 2 law firms from 98 to 2001 after serving in the US Navy Judge Advocate General's Corps from 94 to 98. Keith serves on ICSC's Diversity and Inclusion Working Group and is an active in NARIT, serving as co-chair of the 2019 NARIT HR Forum. He is also a member of the International Coach Federation and serves on the board of Alzheimer's Association Cincinnati chapter. Keith, thanks for joining us this morning. And thanks to all of you for giving your time and expertise to the discussion. To our audience, as we get kicked off here, please feel free to begin submitting your questions via the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. We will begin fielding those and submitting them to the panelists shortly after they are received. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and kick us off. Gentlemen, as mentioned, our three broad topics as we consider reopening the workplace are safety, policy, and change management. I'm going to start with safety. Obviously, we all consider this word a little differently against the backdrop of COVID-19 and coupled with the idea of being in a workplace with one another. So Keith, I'm going to open with you and then I'll move to Kevin and Greg to jump in after that. From a human resources perspective, what are some of the most important things you've considered around the idea of employee safety?
Well, thank you, Jason, and my fellow panelists. I'm happy to be here. So from a safety perspective, there's a number of things. So we've been closely monitoring all of the state governmental orders, stay-at-home orders, CDC guidance, World Health Organization guidance, et cetera. And really the biggest thing from a safety perspective is when we start to reopen our office, which for us really is starting with a pilot phase this coming Tuesday, is we want to make sure we have the absolute healthiest and safest environment that we can provide. And so that's been pouring through all of the various guidance on everything from questionnaires, temperature reading, social distancing within the workplace, which includes everything from traffic flow patterns to social distancing in restrooms and elevators, to hand sanitizing, disinfecting, and cleaning, to in our case, we own our own building, and that even goes so far as looking at the HVAC system and how do we ensure airflow issues, and OSHA provides some guidance there too. So it's really a number of things that we've put some very specific things in place, but even more so, it's about kind of providing in our case, we refer to employees as associates, giving them the comfort level that whenever we're going to allow them opportunity to work in the office again, that we've done everything that we can to provide a safe environment for them, and really to kind of, frankly, for the hearts and minds of associates as much as for the safety. And I shared just before our call, we just had a call with a group to kind of orient them to the new procedures. And really my messaging to them more than anything was, listen, there's some things we're going to do well. There's some things that you're going to see that we can learn and do better. And I welcome and invite all of your feedback, because that'll allow us to consider, whatever the future may hold in terms of future phases. And I reminded them, we're only as safe as the unsafest of us. So whatever you bring into the office, you're bringing into the rest. And so really just conveying that message strongly.
Great. Thank you, Keith. Appreciate that. Greg, I'm going to bounce over to you. Same question around safety, and I'm sure a lot of your commentary will probably reflect much of Keith's, but from a legal point of view, what are the things that you're thinking about right now as you look internally at your own organization and advise your clients as well?
Yeah, there's certainly some overlap, but those legal questions, they're changing daily, and they continue to grow daily as well too. So I think it is, it's me kind of touching on just a little bit on what Keith mentioned a little bit ago. And it kind of starts with, to begin with is, can an employer even tell their employees to go home or to stay at home? And generally speaking, again, this goes to what Keith had mentioned there, is that employers, yes, you can do that. You can tell your employees to either go home or stay at home. But the caveat is you need to look and see what is the what are the orders in your particular area? You know, think of a local municipality like Chicago. I know they have a separate order that requires employees to stay home if they have symptoms there. So it's kind of generally, yes, you can do that. But one thing that we're kind of running into, like I said, another question in that area is, well, what if a person's higher risk? You know, we think of those persons who are, you know, they might be elderly, or you know of some sort of disease that they have that could, you know, cause serious problems if they do in fact get COVID-19. And the issue with that is, under the Americans with Disabilities Act, is you can't single them out. So you can't, you know, say, well, we're really concerned with you in particular because you have this lung disease. You in particular need to go home. You can't do something like that. I'm guessing Keith has run into those types of problems also too. But you have to be kind of careful with those types of, you know, person-specific types of decisions. And along those lines also too, even with the idea of testing employees also as far as their temperature before they come in, you know, another issue with that is just with wage and hour laws. Like, we don't think about that. If you're having your employee kind of just wait outside and they're in a line of 10 people and it takes you a half hour to test everyone, well, what does that look like as far as their wage and hours? Are you gonna have to pay them for that time period? And generally speaking, you might have to do that. So it's another kind of question that folks, you know, didn't think about until it came up and waiting outside their door. And I think the other kind of issue with folks coming back to work that we're dealing with a lot right now is just the idea of personal travel. You know, what can you ask them? You know, the questionnaires and things like that. What can you ask them? And generally, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission has said that you can ask an employee if they've been to a level 3 risk area. So think anywhere globally, or if they've been on a cruise, or you can ask about if they've been to any areas where state or local health authorities have recommended self-quarantining as well. So it's kind of a per person, or, you know, per geographic region type of question or type of analysis that you have to make. But again, it's changing on a daily basis.
Great input. Thank you, Greg. I appreciate that. Kevin, I'm going to pivot to you here in a second. First, I'm going to field a question. And Keith, I'm going to throw this at you. Lauren asked the question. Could you elaborate a little bit on the questionnaires that you're sending out? What kinds of questions those contain?
Sure. So yeah, Greg's right. It's kind of a delicate balance of with the privacy issues that you have to navigate, but also making sure you're asking the right questions that more trigger people to think of the things that they should be thinking about before re-entering the office. So we developed something internally using Microsoft Forms. Turned out being a very useful tool for us, that simply asks people to identify their name, their department, have they taken their temperature. If their temperature is above 100.4, which is the CDC guidelines, there is a question about whether they have knowingly been exposed to anyone who has been diagnosed with COVID. There are a couple of questions related to whether they have any symptoms of COVID. And then we on the whole travel thing has been a tough one for us to navigate, and where we at least initially landed on it is we have asked an international question about whether you've traveled internationally in the last 14 days, which generally speaking is the incubation period that people follow in terms of recommended self-quarantine. And if essentially you answer those questions, and they are knockout questions, that if you answer a question that is a knockout question, you will get a red screen. It actually says stop, got a big stop sign. It says you're not authorized to go into the office today. And so everyone has to take that questionnaire on a daily basis, and that's kind of our way. And then we have a backup temperature that if you got into the office and you failed to take your temperature that day, because we're essentially asking you to self-certify. We have a temperature station with a touchless temperature device. You have to touch it to take your temperature and wipe it down, but it does not require any insertion into your mouth or anything of that nature. Then you have the ability to do that. So there are a few of those things, and then you have to deal with the privacy issues. So even in the information is only going to HR, we'll have to treat it like any other PII. Protect it, make sure it's not treated, that people don't have access to that, because you are making a medical inquiry in a manner of speaking. And so that's how we're addressing the questionnaire. Again, we're starting this on Tuesday. We're going to learn, and I'm sure over time it'll adjust as more guidance comes out, and we learn what's working well and what's not.
Thanks, Keith. That's really insightful, and it sounds like you guys have a great system that you've put in place to go through that. So I think that'll help a lot of us out. Kevin, let's introduce cyber here a little bit. And it seems a little bit crazy to think about this, but when I think about the cyber perspective, most businesses, we sort of pulled a trap door from a technology standpoint and shuttled everybody home. Some of us had better plans than others, I think. But when we think about this employee safety issue, and we're all going to be very focused on that, but there's still some cyber safety as everybody's re-entering the workplace. Could you walk us through your perspective on that and what we need to be thinking about?
Absolutely. And I love all the comments that were just made. They're extremely important. And obviously there's no cybersecurity comparison really to those health-related safety risks. I mean, those are the priority. The things that Keith and Greg both mentioned, those have to be number one. In the cyber realm, the focus is back into the operational space and about just business continuity, business safety. We introduced in an earlier webinar the idea of secure business continuity. So once you have all those human safety focused and health related risks covered, we don't want to overlook an entire other arena of risk here that needs to be managed, having to do with how we protect our companies and our information from all of the many risks that are out there. I can't think of a worse situation than being a company that successfully navigates first all of the actual health risks, and then it navigates all of the transition to working from home and making that work, and then comes back into the office and they make that work, and they just go through both of those waves of challenges, and then perhaps a month, 2 or 6 months down the road, get hit with a debilitating cybersecurity attack that absolutely shuts down their business. And there's a very famous statistic that approximately 43% of companies that have cybersecurity breaches that are mid-sized to small businesses, they go out of business. So what would be worse than going through and surviving all of this human safety related risk and then all of this transition related risk and getting back in and then falling prey to a cyber attack that just destroys operations? So we want to avoid that. While we're focusing on that, the human focus side, we want to make sure that our short and long-term prospects, cybersecurity-wise, are managed well so that we still are operating after COVID-19 is a thing of the past. So the good news is that the basics of information security that reduce risk before COVID-19 are still the right ones that reduce risk now. But the bad news is, if there were any existing gaps in a company's cyber posture that were already in place or maybe that weren't known, you've got a greatly increased risk landscape right now. The time that cybersecurity attackers really love, that they take the greatest advantage of, are times of change and times of uncertainty. And has there ever been a greater time of business change and uncertainty than this past 60 to 90 days? Not in our lifetime. I don't think any of us have ever seen anything like this. And that is an absolute gold mine, unfortunately, for attackers trying to take advantage of mass change and mass uncertainty and how we operate, how business operations actually are carried out. So the good thing is to do, if you have an understanding of any gaps and issues in your cybersecurity, of tracking those, being aware of them is the big strength that you can leverage. But if you don't know, if you don't have an awareness of these things, as we move out of work from home and more towards reopening, this is the time to take the time to either use your internal personnel or get help with external experts to evaluate what your posture is, what you're doing and what you're not doing, so that you can undo your current business continuity plan. You can undo work from home in the safest possible way without leaving a lot of openings for cyber attackers to work their way into your network.
Kevin, it's interesting. We talk a lot about checking people's temperatures, like Keith mentioned. We should probably be checking machines that are coming back into the workplace as well. Is that a fair statement?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
There's a great analogy that I've heard several times about your laptop has been away from home, off in a playground, the playground being a much more insecure place than being at home. And that playground is dirty, it's filthy. It may not have the protections that home has. And so our laptops are often like little kids who've been off, unfortunately, potentially playing in the mud. And when they come back in, they need to be cleaned very, very carefully. And here's another issue there. You may well need to take stock of your individual enterprise cyber posture. There's not going to be one answer that necessarily fits every company. If your particular situation has risks for your machines, your mobiles, your laptops, your even desktops that may have a particular risk area that could be different from another company's, then that risk is what you want to address. And if you know you have a greater risk of a particular type, you may want to have certain machines or even certain departments, certain types of workers, have their machines isolated or quarantined until they can be gone through more thoroughly before you introduce them to your corporate network. Or you might want to have a separate virtual LAN or virtual network in your enterprise where machines that are brought back into the workforce are forced to exist for a short period of time until they're brought back into regular operations. But it's going to depend on what your risk tolerance is and on what gaps you have. And if you don't know them, that's a serious issue.
Okay, thank you. So I think this starts to bleed into our second broad topic of policy. And, you know, Keith, I'll go ahead and bounce back to you now. How does this sort of state we're in now test or change HR policy that needs considered from your point of view?
Yeah, it's kind of evolved over time. So when this first all started, there was a lot of focus and attention on leave policies. There was the FFCRA, and I apologize, I don't remember what the acronym fully stands for, but essentially leave related to COVID, and you had to look at your handbooks and determine, you know, what's your leave policy, what's your PTO policy, you know, how do you navigate those. And so that was kind of one of the earliest things people were looking at. You know, what's evolving now, of course, is the reentry procedures, but with that comes up a lot of things like privacy, travel. You know, Greg mentioned that's one we really grappled with. We own shopping centers, and we have leasing agents and property managers who support those shopping centers in 34 states across the U.S. And they have to meet with tenants, prospective tenants, and they have to make sure those properties are working well. And some of them have been chomping at the bit to get back on airplanes, and you know, do we allow that? And so that's the travel policy has been a real you know, challenge to kind of think through. And then really, frankly, all your procedures around getting back in the office. So when we have an office procedure that says you have to wear facial coverings everywhere other than at your workstation when you are at least 6 feet or more from another person, and then someone, which we're not there yet, and I hope we aren't, but if someone does not abide by those policies, you know, what happens? And it really starts to look like any other policy or behavioral expectation that you have of associates in the workplace. And so enforcement, self-policing are all going to be, you know, interesting things to deal with, because I think we've all seen this. We've you know, you walk into Lowe's, if you've had, or the grocery store, and some people are very vigilant and staying 6 feet away and wearing a mask, and then you get the guy that seems to want to get right up in your face. And I think as employers are going to have to deal with those same issues, and how do you handle associates, and you know, we're doing our best to try to convey not only the what but the why, in terms of why we're doing the things that we're doing, so people really understand that it's not us being big brother or trying to be draconian. We're not a policy-driven company per se. We try to not be, but listen, these are things people have to do, and we have to balance, you know, kind of being strong in setting those expectations, because if they're not followed, you know, there'll be ramifications. But it's not because, you know, we want to be a very policy-driven organization. It's because safety is at issue, and we've got to take that, you know, really, it's paramount.
Yeah, that's really interesting. You know, when you start thinking through some of the specific scenarios that could occur, and to your point, what happens when somebody complains so-and-so was within 6 feet of me, right? I mean, that's a whole new world right there. Greg, let's pivot into your perspective around some of those things. I mean, we've got everything that Keith just mentioned, and then we've also got other things going on in most of our organizations. We've increased the use of collaboration tools and probably different types of technology and how we're using that and what's appropriate use. So comment on anything you want there, but when you think about policy from a legal perspective, where would you come in?
Yeah, much development in this area as well right now. And I think I look at it in kind of two different ways. Is first of all, do you need to add or revise your policy? That's kind of one side. And the other side is, what do you need to emphasize in your current policies that you may have already implemented at this point? And in regards to that first prong there, it really is, we moved so fast to a work from home environment. I think of a law firm that I'm involved in with nearly 900 attorneys across the nation. And attorneys are notorious for needing that physical office space, and then all of a sudden it's within a week you have to be at home and try to figure everything out between meetings, phone conferences, anything like that. So the problem is that, well, what does your policy say in regards to that? Did your policy kind of cover that already, or do you need to make revisions to your policy? So when I think of ideas or kind of issues such as does your policy say that work from home is required, or is it just recommended? Or does the policy apply with equal force to all employees, or does it accept certain employees? Or, another issue too is, are you going to say that your employees have to use certain meeting or collaboration tools, and that's the only time they can talk with each other, and they kind of go offline as well? So it's determining whether you need to add something to your particular policy that now reflects our current work from home environment. And then as far as the other part, emphasizing certain aspects, I think Kevin's going to probably talk about this as well too, emphasizing certain parts of your policy that you may have already implemented. One kind of problem or legal issue to even think about is just employee privacy. Right, you probably have some sort of provisions within your HR policies about employee privacy. Well, how does that affect an employee now that's using their own laptop or using their own mobile device that they weren't using before? Are you, as an employer, are you even, say, passively monitoring their personal or health information, things like that, that wasn't even on your radar before? So if you are, having some sort of monitoring, your policies need to reflect that. You need to give your employees notice of that, give them adequate notice, enough time that they have to review it, but then also acknowledge it as well. So in case there's any problems later on, you have that for your records also.
Hey, Jason, if I just piggyback one thing. So what I think is going to be really interesting from a policy perspective, in many ways, our work from home or alternative work arrangement practices or policies, they kind of got thrown out the window, and because the government's various states, et cetera, just told us you have to work from home. And so whether you were lenient in those regards or progressive thinking, or whether you were old school, you had the government telling you basically what your policy was, at least on the short-term basis. But what I think is going to be fascinating is, as you start to see, the gradual phasing back in of work, you will get to the place at some point where you will have the associate who has been doing a stellar job working from home, maybe in a role that you never thought was going to be able to be done effectively from home when you were thinking about it in the abstract. And you will and then that person will say, well, I really don't ever want to come back to the office, even when there's a vaccine and it's all safe, the all clear is there, and they say, yeah, but why can't I just continue to work from home? And employers, I think, that are starting to look out over the horizon and think about that are already going, that is going to be interesting. What does it mean for my company culture if all of a sudden I have a workforce that is potentially remote or a third remote? And what does it mean for my physical plant requirements? Do I really need an office the size that I have today? And what design elements should it have? Should I have these nice open collaborative work environments that now require me to put plexiglass to allow people to come back in? Or do I go back to old school offices and high cubes that provide barriers to, to droplets going more than 6 feet? It's a little early, I think, right now for companies to kind of have those figured out. But we're already, and I know others are as well, starting to think ahead. And I think it's going to be fascinating in terms of how this affects the way all of us, in industry agnostic, work.
It's great contribution, Keith. Kevin, I'll kick it over to you. I know in your role as CISO for so many different organizations, you sit on a lot of risk committees. And I know you're involved in a lot of these policy conversations. So give us your perspective.
Yeah, thanks. So there is, of course, a big focus within the business continuity and disaster recovery policy area, and that is a great place to start. So if you're right now exercising your business continuity plan and it's working for you, if you kind of had a plan in place that addresses just this sort of scenario, which some companies are enjoying right now. They're looking at their policy, and when all this happened, they're like, you know what? We need to turn on our business continuity policy. We need to activate it. This is a good fit. That's great. Make sure, though, if that's the case, that you're tracking and you're documenting the results, that you're capturing problems and pain points that might have cropped up over the past several months for later improvement. That's a good position to be in. But if you're in a position where you found your existing policies and procedures for business continuity and disaster recovery and related, have you found those lacking? Then take advantage of this time to improve and to get help doing that if needed. We always kind of have the buzzword that bad guys love to take advantage, of a disaster. Never let a good disaster go to waste. Well, this has been a disaster, and it is a business and an operations and a human disaster. But on the positive side, we also want to not let the lessons learned and the trouble that we've seen go to waste. We can take advantage of this situation to try to improve, to get better at our business continuity, to increase the idea of secure business continuity, which I think needs to be the phrase from now on. We shouldn't talk about business continuity. We should talk about secure business continuity. It's not worth continuing our business if we're doing it in a way that puts our entire businesses at risk. And the same with disaster recovery. So that's one policy area that I think needs to have a great deal of focus right now across many enterprises. Some others, though, that are related that really should be focused on as well, training. Both having extensions to and the implementation of training policies to include remote training, work from home, return to work training, to include technical and technological factors, as well as all of the human factors that go into training to successfully and securely activate business continuity. Communications policies, ranging from what's allowed and what's not allowed for business communications. That's a really big topic right now. And then incident response. So incident response policies and plans, they can look very different in a work from home world. You no longer have the option of just sending someone from the IT department to a computer where something might have gone wrong and just having them fix it. So you have a great focus put on remote incident response, and then a greater focus on the awareness of end users. So having those policies grow and change, those are just an example of a few, but having those policies adapt to this type of situation. We don't want to miss this opportunity to improve those policies. So again, when something like this happens again, and it may, that we're ready for it and that we're ready to have procedures and policies in place that support us.
Thanks, Kevin. Very good. As we move into our third and final pillar on change management, I'll take an opportunity to remind the audience, feel free to submit questions in the Q&A box. They do not need to revolve around any of these broad topics we're talking about. And in case you couldn't tell, all three of these guys are living this right now, day in and day out. So I'm sure they've got some additional insight to share besides what I'm asking. But let's jump into change management. And Greg, obviously everything we've discussed so far really fits under that umbrella. There's so much change going on. What advice would you give organizations as they consider so much of this and they're reforming things like safety and policy? How do you think of, how would you counsel on change management overall?
I don't know if my advice is really legal specific. Instead, I'd say it's more general, but it kind of stems from dealing with legal issues, and really it's making sure that all your key stakeholders are involved from the start. Because what I've found is, and this kind of goes both ways, is you have the legal department driving some sort of change based on a new regulation that just came out that day. And they're worried about the legal consequences, but they don't tell security about what's going on, or they don't involve HR as much as they should. And then you're, dealing with those repercussions later on. And the same, and it works the opposite way too, is, security, they're, dealing with all of these folks who are now working from home. They need to make this, adjustment as soon as they can. And well, wait a second, there might be a legal repercussion as far as the information involved, things like that. So really it is making sure that your key stakeholders are involved. So, who is most affected by this change? Who are the people with expertise, or even the people who are going to be skeptical of any of the changes that you have to make, because you want all of them on board, and it's going to help you it's going to help advocate for your position. Because if we think about change management, really it's part project management, but it's also part social art, is getting people on your side when you're going through these changes. So I guess that's my main point is, again, make sure that all the key stakeholders are engaged from the start.
Yeah, it's really, really great advice, Greg. Thank you for that. And a couple of your final comments are a good segue over to Keith, I think. Keith, how do we appropriately consider the human element? I mean, you did a really great job earlier detailing some of the changes you guys are making, even to your physical environment, and people are walking in potentially to a whole new layout, a whole new way of considering things, and there's this whole human element of change that's taking place. So how have you thought through that from your seat?
Yeah, so, this certainly puts everything you do under a microscope in terms of, how you communicate with your associates, how engaged your associate population is. And so, which we put a lot of effort into all the time. So fortunately, I think in times of crisis, you can rely upon that goodwill and, frankly, that trust that's been built up over time. I think it'd be hard to turn it on just in the time of crisis. So I guess that's my plug for, these are just good business practices generally. But specific to this event, just to give you some real life examples. So very early on, we did all the things that Greg talked about in terms of a very cross-functional group looking at issues to get buy-in, to get perspective, and I think always having a very palms up approach to, listen, we're not going to get this all right. We're going to make mistakes. Those types of things, that sentiment, if it's consistent and genuine, goes a long way towards getting buy-in and getting associate involvement. And for us specifically, we've the first week or two, we had I think we had 2 town halls a week where the entire associate population, and our CEO would speak, I would speak, we gave business updates from our COO, and we've continued that. I think we had town hall 13, if I'm not mistaken, or 12 this Monday, and we've been very open and kind of just in giving constant information about where we're going, where it's headed, just so people aren't surprised. And a lot of this is just about giving people a comfort level in a time when there's just a lot of anxiety in the world, that, okay, my leadership team is, at least they're on this, and they may not have every answer, but they're at least looking into the issues for my safety. And I think, while it's important to get the procedures down, and we did that, I say even more so, just that constant tone of back and forth and listening and soliciting and feedback, that goes a long way towards making whatever you're trying to do from a change management perspective effective. And we, when we think, we pregame before every town hall. We meet in the morning, and we kind of walk through what's going to be on the agenda, what are we going to do, and we talk about how are we going to convey this. And we beat each other up a little bit in terms of, okay, but are you really getting at what associates are going to be concerned about, so that when we go into that town hall, it's not just Keith giving an update and our CEO giving an update, but we've kind of thought through from the associate perspective. And I think that it's time, it's effort, but we believe it's really time well spent.
Yeah, that's great. And obviously, just from hearing you speak, you've leaned into Greg's point about having the key stakeholders involved and at the table throughout. and then really handled it in a very considerate fashion to what people are thinking. So that's great advice. Thanks. Kevin, I feel like you've riddled this change management thing through all of your responses so far this morning. But what else would you add, or what other risks do we need to be considering from a cyber standpoint as we bring people back?
Well, I want to strongly agree with what Keith just said about the importance of communication to change management, and take that to a very pragmatic level as well. I mean, the entire pandemic-driven exercise that all our companies have gone through has really been one extended change management challenge. It's just been one after the next of challenges related to how do we change efficiently, how do we change safely. And now we're looking at how do we remove and return from changes efficiently, safely, constructively, all the right ways, considering all these different dimensions. But when it comes to the importance of communications, what constantly comes to mind for me from a cybersecurity perspective is how important it is to know what changes have been made, to know what exceptions have been made. And that's really the key, I think, in a lot of what's happened. There's been a lot of exception management that has to happen. A lot of exceptions have been put in place to make sure we can continue to operate in our different businesses during this change to the work from home environment. The problem is, have all these exceptions been tracked? Does everyone know what things have been allowed to be quote unquote temporary because we're in this environment? And if the door of communication is not open for individual associates up to senior managers to communicate and make sure that they can communicate, here's some exceptions, here's an issue, here's a change we had to make because we just need to do this to continue to operate. If those changes aren't known, aren't communicated, and aren't tracked, then how can we be sure as we return to work that those changes are undone, that higher risk activities or processes that might have been enabled because of COVID-19, because of working from home, are removed, that doors are closed, that extra loopholes might be needed are temporary. So communication is really key here, and right down to the pragmatic level of making sure that we undo all the things that we may have had to do to survive these past 2 to 3 months. So that's, in other words, recovering from change is just as important as making the change work in the first place.
Okay, great, thank you. So we've got a few minutes left. Definitely still open to fielding any questions that exist out there. And I'll jump on those as soon as we see them. But I guess I'll just kind of throw it out to you guys to consider the following. I mean, we've discussed a lot today, but would you share any other key lessons learned, maybe mistakes that you saw made along the way that you think, wow, that was avoidable if we would have thought through that a little bit differently, or other things that you've seen either in your own organizations or a lot of the companies that you've worked with? So I'll kind of throw that out there and see if you guys have any. Feel free to jump in if you have something there.
I've got one that I'll jump in with right away, and that is just the need for long-term planning for these kinds of business continuity events. It's kind of thing that a lot of companies that I've worked with have not actually put any time and energy into this sort of planning, and unfortunately, it's caught several companies by surprise. And that's unfortunate. So you have a lot of scrambling, you have a lot of just trying to quote unquote make ends meet operationally to successfully make the transition that we all made in March from in-house to remote work. A lot of scrambling, and that's unfortunately the highest possible risk way to manage that kind of a transition. So I think one of the big lessons learned for me that I think everyone is learning if we're in that position is we really do have to take the time to plan in advance, to work through scenarios and testing of business continuity plans, and to keep that going regularly, not counting on the fact that, well, such and such is never going to happen. I think that's a big takeaway from this whole event.
Yeah, and Kevin, I reflect and remember a conversation you and I were both in a few weeks ago with somebody, and you actually gave the advice, yeah, you kind of had to run out of it quickly, take notes and keep track of what you're doing. And then when we return, look back at that and determine, were those the right steps or how could we have done that differently? And you sort of made the comment, and then already you've improved your BCP just by doing that. So I think your comments reflect that.
Absolutely.
I'll add one that's still TBD a little bit, and that is, like many of you all listening to this webinar, I've listened to countless webinars from law firms and governmental authorities and the like, just trying to be informed and educated. And I'm also I stay very tight with my network. So there's a group of my peers with competitor companies, and we talk regularly. And they're kind of watching us. Some of them are in major metropolitan areas, a little more hotspots than we are in the Midwest, and some of them have pushed their reopening dates till end of June, end of July. New York is, I mean, they're talking September at the earliest. So they're all keenly watching what we're doing, but we're really out in front. And to be really honest, it's with a little trepidation that we are starting with a pilot phase of reopening for a small group starting this coming Tuesday. We're all concerned about, what's going to be the potential for a resurgence or, a rebound effect of the virus. And so you get nervous. Am I creating risk by allowing people back in the office? And so for us, the balance was, we really opened it up only for individuals who really asked to be back in an office for some business reason. I think we worked past a lot of, what is essential employees versus not. I mean, that went out the window in the first week because we learned that we could do many things out. And it's amazing the creativity people come with workarounds in the event of a crisis. So, but some people have slow internet. They have little kids running around. They don't have a good workspace. There's limitations. So we're starting with that group. So we feel good about it, that we're accommodating a need for people and not forcing anybody or even asking anybody to come back in. So we feel like it's the right move, but we're a little early as amongst our peers. And so it is with a little nervousness really that we do that. And so, I hope I don't look, in July, August, September and say, gee, we were a little ahead of it. All we can do is make the best decision with the information that we have and do everything we can to protect the health and safety, which is what we're trying to do. And our hope is that if we can get the people that absolutely, have some business need to be there, give them a good environment where they can be productive and engaged, and then we can just kind of hit the pause button and hold off for a while with no specific timeline. That's kind of how we're approaching things.
That's great. Thank you, Keith. Greg, anything to add from your point of view?
Yeah, I'll just add briefly, because I know we're up against our timeline here, is, just the idea of offline communications. And this goes to Kevin's point, just as far as exceptions and, keeping track of all of those. And, when the panelists, when we were preparing for our webinar today, we had brought this topic up, and we could essentially have an entire webinar just on this idea of data governance and things like that. But, with the idea that everyone's working from home now, is, your employees, they have to talk with each other. And it's not always just via secure email or secure messaging. So, texting, it's 2020, that's part of it. So just to be careful of, what your employees are discussing in these offline communications, and perhaps, including certain references in your policies to let them know, don't discuss confidential information. And I bring this up because dealing with an issue for a healthcare practice seems not to be a big problem on its face, but when employees are texting each other as far as which patients are coming in for appointments, but then also explaining or listing the reason why as far as their diagnosis, then you're getting into protected healthcare type of information there. So they're obviously with HIPAA and things like that, there's a whole new set of problems that they're doing that they're going to be facing if they start using text for those types of communications. So it's just to be careful. It's it's going to be part of what what this current environment is, but you need to keep an eye on it, as Kevin mentioned there.
Awesome. Very good. Well, thank you, Greg. Thank you. And thanks to Dinsmore for being such a great partner and helping us put this together and put this on today. We appreciate the expertise that you bring and that your firm brings to the table. Keith, same to you. We know how incredibly busy you are right now. And Phillips Edison being one of the leading employers in Cincinnati area, and beyond that. But it means a lot to have you and your perspective here. And Kevin, you've got hundreds of companies that you get exposure to all the time, and to bring that to us today, I really appreciate all three of you for your time and attention. To our audience, we will be releasing this. We have recorded it. We will send you the link to that recording so you can access it later. Feel free to send that along. We appreciate your participation today and hope this provided some value. Thank you and have a great day. See you, everybody.